Looks like we have a good group on here today, so I think we can go ahead and kick it off. Thank you, everyone, for joining our webinar today on prioritizing AppSec. We have a great group of speakers, but before we get started, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available to all attendees after the webinar. If you have questions at any time during the webinar, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box. We'll be monitoring that box and leave time at the end of the webinar for our speakers to address any questions. Before we get started, just a little bit about us. So we're the National Cybersecurity Alliance. It's our mission to empower a more secure, interconnected world. We're a nonprofit organization, and we create free resources, toolkits, and webinars like this one to educate consumers on online safety best practices and educate cybersecurity professionals as well. We run a number of campaigns and programs throughout the year. One of them coming up is Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October. So we have a lot of great resources for that campaign coming up. We hope you all can get involved. All of our resources are available on our website, staysafeonline.org. So if you're ever looking for any resources to share with employees, advice, any articles or topics on cybersecurity just in your personal life or for your organization, please visit our website and we'll share all of our contact information at the end of the webinar as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Tanya Dudley is Executive Advisor of the X-Force Cyber Range at IBM and a National Cybersecurity Alliance board member. So Tanya, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and kick us off.
Thank you, Jen, and thanks for having all of us here today. So let's start with Michelle. Let's go ahead and if you could do a quick intro about yourself.
I'm a cloud security advocate at Google in developer relations. I have a career in finance as I've been an enterprise security architect. I've also worked in academia and also other nonprofits such as AARP, for example. And my focus tends to be on product security and how to make it more accessible for developers.
Thank you. Nathan.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today. My name is Nathan Harvey, and I lead up a program at Google Cloud called DORA. I don't know if you've heard of DORA or not, but DORA is a research program that's been running for over a decade that looks into how do teams get better at delivering and operating software. So as you might imagine, security plays a big role in that, and I'm really excited to share that with you today.
Yay, I'm assuming DORA has its own little program logo too, just envisioning that. So Andrew, thank goodness we have somebody from OWASP joining us today. Can you do a little intro for yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Andrew Vanderstock. I'm the Executive Director of the OWASP Foundation. I'm also the OWASP Top 10 co-lead. I previously have been the OWASP Developer Guide co-lead and the Application Security Verification co-lead. I've been doing application security since 1998 and helped develop much of the field. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. I think it'll be really illuminating.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. And thank you for those online joining us and listening to this recording. I think this is a really important topic that we're covering today. So Michelle, let's kick it off with you and start with, oftentimes we developers prioritize speed over security when developing code. When coding software with security in mind takes more time, fixing security vulnerabilities after code has been written also takes time. Keeping this in mind, how can developers and their leaders strike a balance between speed and security?
I think it's a cultural issue. The problem that I see a lot in application security and in security in general is that, we're technologists, techies want to tech, right? Mm-hmm. That's why we're drawn to this field. Right. But the reality is that this is, you hear about adaptive problems or challenges versus technical challenges in social sciences. And this is definitively an adaptive challenge. application security is very complex because we have very complex systems now. In the olden days, you could have a couple of people working on some code, and it's just not that way anymore. You may have a couple of hundred people working on code now and different components. So that means they have to talk to each other. And it especially means that security resources need to show up in a way that they meet the developers where they are. Because let's face it, the business units are there. Their priority is the business, right? It's getting a new feature out. No developer wakes up and says, I'm going to do a terrible job and write insecure code. No one does that unless they have something wrong. But so we have to remember that. We have to meet people where they are and understand their priorities. And what that means is sometimes being pragmatic, which is very difficult when you work in security, because you want to do the right thing. That's why people are drawn to security, right? But what, and my esteemed colleague, Nathan, will get into a little more with Dora, but what some of our State of DevOps research has found is that when security people show up, when the teams show up and they work alongside developers and they collaborate on policy and as code, for example, it increases the trust between the teams and the confidence in the changes being deployed. And while it may seem like a lot of work up front, I have to talk to somebody. Right. At the end of the day, that work that you do, that relationship work, that process work, because it's people, process, technology, and culture, right? That upfront work is going to lead to more productivity, right? In fact, what the DORA research found is that teams with low levels of security practices have 1.4 times greater odds of having high levels of burnout than teams with high levels of security. And we found that teams who integrate security are 1.6 times more likely to meet or exceed organizational goals. So guess what? Security makes your business better. Yay! Right? So that's what we want. And so it's about engagement, and it's about change leadership. And I know we want to believe that we can just buy a thing or implement a tool and then it's fixed. It just doesn't work like that anymore.
Right. Nathan, how about how do you want to add into what us within that DORA data?
For sure. I think if we go back to like the original premise of the question, right? Or should we work on security or should we work on features? And the fact is that security is a feature of your application. And it's a thing that like the reason we build features is to create great experiences for our users. And if what we do is fail to provide a secure experience for our users, we're eliminating that trust that our users are placing in us, regardless of what type of application you use. And it really doesn't matter. You're creating that application to create a user experience. And so staying connected to those goals is really important. I think the other thing that happens all too often is as organizations and as teams, we get into this place of othering. Well, the security team is responsible for security. I'm responsible for the features, right? This is a thing that might happen. And we have to try to avoid that. In fact, the whole movement of DevOps was kind of born out of that idea. It's developers' job to build things and it's operators' jobs to run things. And when you have these misaligned incentives, and that's really what it boils down to, where we end up with friction between these teams. And we have to remember and recognize that we're here together to drive the business forward, to create those great user experiences. And you can't have a great user experience if that user experience is leaking your data everywhere or opens you up to insecure practices.
Right, because at the end of the day, security isn't their main job, right? I used to always remind my security operations team, do you know how to write a journal entry or write a legal document, right? That's not their thing, right? So we need to make it easier for those individuals to just navigate in a secure manner, right? And I think that's the whole premise of Secure by Design.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Andrew, what do you advocate for organizations when they have this conundrum, right, of security over speed, right?
So to a certain degree, one of the things that security can help with is help elucidate your requirements to a greater degree. And that will allow you to actually write unit tests and integration tests that prove the security and the privacy of the actual thing you're trying to build. And that actually reduces the amount of work in the end. So as long as the value proposition is seen by the developers and you come to the developers, as Michelle has actually said, if you come to them and say, look, I really want to help you build some tests for you, and if you could help me by creating some code that does this, like I should be able to see my profile, but I shouldn't be able to see anyone else's, that automatically starts having a good conversation. And I think, it might actually require a little bit of extra code, but the reality is we can also save a lot of code, like password resets. The questions and answers should not exist. I can save you 10,000 lines in 3 months of your life just by saying, don't do it,
Yeah.
So it's swings and roundabouts. Let's work together to actually build secure stuff because it is actually rather important to the end users. You don't want a bank that like allows you to um, get other people's money. You want them to be able to be in a strong position that your balance is your balance. That's the sort of trust that we expect.
Yeah. So Nathan, let's switch gears a little bit. And proper communication with an organization is essential, right, for fostering security culture. How can those higher up within the organization forge a relationship with developers that emphasize security in their products?
Yeah, I think this is, it kind of echoes some of the comments that Andrew was just making as well around communication. And it's really about building that empathy across various teams. And I think, some of the things that we look at within the DORA research, we actually lean on sociologist research. His name is Dr. Ron Westrum, and he's created this topology of organizational cultures. What Westrum did was he looked at a number of different industries and organizations in other industries, like safety critical industries in particular, nuclear power plants, emergency rooms, and things like that. And what he was able to do was identify how information flows through that organization really is an indicator of the type of culture that you have. And I often like to think about and sort of look through Westrum's lens in the case of an incident. Let's say you have a security vulnerability that has escaped. It's in your production environment right now. What are we going to do about this? And in one of the sort of types of organizations that Westrum identified, the pathological kind, when we have someone that says, hey, there's a vulnerability in production, we're going to punish that person. The messenger gets punished. And that's not helpful for anyone. If you move to another type of organization, a bureaucratic organization, the messenger might just be neglected. Yeah, you say there's a vulnerability, but our policy and our process says that we're going to keep moving forward. So that's not good either. In Westrum's generative or performance-oriented organizations, the messengers get trained, and we take that message from the messenger and we amplify that. And we're going to take this failure or this incident or this vulnerability as an opportunity to learn. What could we have done? What can we do to improve how our system works? And when we use that word system, it's important to remember also that we're talking about not just the computer systems, but like the socio-technical system that involves us, the humans. And so having that collaboration and working together and learning, that's a really powerful way that we can drive that. And then from a leader's perspective, it's really important that our leader understands that we're here to drive towards the goals of our mission. Now, a leader's role is not to improve the size of their fiefdom. It's not to improve their capability to climb the ladder, but it's to further the goals of our mission. And when a leader shows up like that, it's much easier for that information to flow. It's much easier for us to learn from things that have gone wrong.
Not only that, if you don't mind me adding on, but the research, some of the academic research out there from people like Karen Renaud, which she focuses on something called human-centered security. And there's this idea that if you use shame or fear appeals to make people do things, no, I'm going to freak them out, I'm going to make them look bad. And everybody knows the security dashboard that we show up with in security, all the red. And the leadership is going, red bad, make it go away as soon as possible.
Yeah.
It's the typical stoplight, imagery. And it doesn't work, right? What researchers have found is that information security policies and fear appeals actually lead to apathy and reduced voluntary security behaviors. What they found, as well as shame, shaming doesn't work either.
Right.
What really works is if you create a supportive environment with strong leadership that is empathetic, that that doesn't have this bureaucratic or pathological culture, like Nathan said. If people feel supported and they feel like they're not going to get punished, then they're going to voluntarily try to do the right thing. They're going to self-disclose. If you have that blameless post-mortem, for example, where, hey, let's approach it from curiosity instead of finding out, instead of trying to determine who we're going to, punish over this, who
Right.
we're going to use the scapegoat, right?
Yeah.
That's not productive. So I think, tactically, when you start talking about, okay, generative cultures are more positive. We know we need leadership. We know we need stewardship from individuals in an organization. What does that translate to? And we need to find behaviors. We need to cultivate these collaborative behaviors that are grounded in emotional intelligence. I know everybody's kind of sick of emotional intelligence
Right.
at this point, but it actually works, right? If we're managing conflict, if we're talking to each other and focusing on collaboration and effective skills, affective, emotional skills, then we're going to have a better environment that supports creativity. If you read Ekval's work, it creates a creative climate, but also it allows people to feel safer and creates psychological safety that they need to sort of give you a soft landing when there is a failure.
Yeah. So, Michelle, I would imagine that you have found leaders who do champion you, that can partner with you, right? Do you kind of leverage them to can you help me out with one of your peers that's maybe
Sure.
of, right? Like, how do you use that peer support system, right?
Yeah, in fact, the best compliment / insult I ever received was when a manager told me that, Michelle, you sound just like a developer. I said, thank you. He thought he was insulting me, but I had spent a lot of time trying to cultivate relationships with development teams, trying to live in their world, because, here's the funny thing. The development team knows the software product or component better than you do. You could be an expert in application security and secure coding, but they do it every day. So they're going to know it better. And a lot of times they'll have the answer before I will or another member of the team.
Yeah.
So yeah, I pretty much have dotted lines to the universe. I'm a security architect.
Yeah.
And it's about showing up with humility, right?
Yeah. And I think another good indicator that you're doing the right thing is it moves from a pushing it out to a pull where they're coming to you, asking you to come join their meetings, come give us the latest updates, right? Like that's when you know you're really making groundwork, because you start to see the ship turning, right?
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I also think that as we talk about culture, culture is people, and it's squishy and it's always changing and it's highly malleable. So like, how do you do something about that? If we reflect back on what Andrew was saying earlier about like automated testing, as a security professional, can I sit down with a software engineer and together we'll come up with a good automated test plan so that the developer will have more confidence as they're creating more, adding new features, changing the code base, etc. They have confidence because they've written these tests before, or we've collaborated on them. They can maybe even extend those tests based on new policies that we have. So it's that concrete, like, let's use the tools to help us change the way that we work. And by doing that, we're also at the same time, we're building that stronger empathy. We're building that collaboration and communication. And so I think that, don't get too lost in the heady culture talks. There are actual activities that you can do right now that are going to promote that.
For example, here's a technique that I've used in a lot of organizations. It's actually on my blog site, but I wrote some user security stories and I based them on the ASVS. I went through the OWASP ASVS and I just went, can I write that as a user story? How can I flip that? And then I created a template and I put it into a separate Jira project, and the developers knew they could go pull them from that. Pretty simple, kind of mindless. It was a lot of, paperwork, it seemed like. I had to think about it a little bit. How can I make it clever and understandable and positive for them? Because, security people like to talk about evil user stories, but you're not making a thing. And that's anathema to a developer who wants to create something positive. So I looked at that and I went, okay, how can I say, for example, as a software customer of blah company, I want my data protected from intentional or unintentional disclosure. Okay, so what are the enabler stories below that? How do I make that happen? And that's a conversation starter now for a product team, right?
Yeah.
That's a practical way of showing up that's still somewhat, it's grounded in the technical, but now I'm giving them a creative input, right?
So just to bounce off that idea some more, we have these cornucopia packs, which are used with developers, and they are literally cards, like playing decks, but they actually have stories on them.
Nice.
And what you do is you actually, in this planning sprint, you actually just pass the cards around and say, does this apply to this sprint? And if you do, you just pin it to the story. And it helps actually elucidate the actual requirements in a fun way. Like, for example, Roman can read and modify unencrypted data in memory or transit. And, does that apply in this particular instance? Who knows? I mean, but at the end of the day, it's a fun way of actually getting them to actually be participants in the security story itself, and they can help write those user stories. I liked like the technique that a negative story gets written on the back of a card, a positive story gets written on the front of the card.
Oh, nice.
And so if you've got a physical wall, it's always fun to put it on glass to see how many of the cards actually have stuff on the other side.
That's a great idea.
I'm assuming we can order those from the OWASP website.
They sort of come and go. They're like this deck costs about $25 to make. So we don't have that many of them, but if you come to our conferences, you can get surprised.
Oh, great. I think that's great. My favorite thing is when I've worked with a lot of Kubernetes teams. I love platform engineering, security. And when I start getting invited to their sprint planning, I'm like, yes, I won. Right? I'm so happy. And I've learned that when I show up, I don't show up with my PowerPoint crack and my you must, you shall. What I do is, hey, let's have a working session. Let's have a co-creation session. And what I do is I actually use the circle technique from restorative justice. And we use something like a mind mapping software, and we all start throwing ideas on the board. And then I'll just be the facilitator and I'll group them together so that I didn't tell a bunch of people what to do. We agreed on it together. We came up with the ideas together.
That's a great concept. So Andrew, let's switch a little bit. As we discussed, communication and culture are key to creating an environment that prioritizes secure code, right? So how can a C-suite get more involved upstream with the development of a new product in future releases, right? Are there things that they should take into mind, right? So that they're not, like we kind of talked about earlier, coming like, we got to get it to market, right?
Yeah. So a big part of this is actually getting upper management buy-in. One of the things, I'm just going to harken back to what Nathan and Michelle have been harping on about all this time because it's so important. Honestly, you need management buy-in because I've been at organizations that were hostile to the work that I was doing as a consultant, and they're now I'm not going to name names, but one of them in particular was one of the largest breaches in Australian history. And that was years after I was there. So the culture was just hostile to security. We were an impediment to getting the stuff out the door. And then it cost them a lot more money. And then they've got hundreds and hundreds of systems, and now they need to go and verify all of them. that is where the actual opportunity cost comes from. You really do need to think about some of our safest industries, such as the airline industry. I watch a fair number of YouTubers in the airline space because they've got a really good story with no blame. And it is the safest form of transport for a reason, because upper management has bought into the idea that is a blameless culture. Pilots will self-report things like, I accidentally fell asleep in the cockpit, and there will be no consequences, but then, they might look at the reasons why that might have occurred: overscheduling, or poor rest periods, or something like that. But there isn't any blame assigned to that. It's literally designed to make sure that in the future it doesn't happen again. We need to get to that culture in our industry. And I would really truly encourage senior management to look at things like ISO 27002, where they require upper management to have buy-in. If you're doing 27002, there's a very good chance that you already should be doing this. Live the life. So I would encourage people to get involved in a blameless culture. I think, honestly, it's the safest way for us to go forward.
I would agree.
I think it's also important to approach it. I mean, security is a feature of the product, and Nathan mentioned this, and that's always been something that I've promoted. I mean, look, software eat the world. That's the culture now. It's a DevOps culture. So why we have UX people in software? We need to have that human-centered UX experience. Like how consumable are security's tools and processes? We need to evaluate. We need to do empathy interviews with stakeholders and understand how difficult do we make it for them to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And we don't always do that. And I think, like Andrew said, it does come from the top, that we make ourselves open and accessible. And when you do have that kind of environment, then you're going to have better conversations. People will feel heard. It's this idea that people are happier when you do things with them instead of to them. Right. If you treat them like an object instead of a subject, which is a more equitable position, then you're going to have a better environment, and people are going to want to work with you and do the right thing.
This question is framed around C-suite. And so when I think back to my previous role being at a product company, there tends to be sometimes revenue tied to a certain contract or a certain product feature, right? And does it meet certain certification levels, right? So having the C-suite understand, like, we have to be secure in this because it generates this, like, talking dollars and cents to them, right? Does that help boost their interest in why we need to spend the time making it more secure?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so in the financial world, they know this. They are regulated, and they're required to do a lot of additional things. In many other industries, if you look at the standard terms and conditions, people try to push the liability onto the consumer, which is not great. Right. But from my perspective, in regulated industries, they are very well aware that their revenue is tied to actually meeting these regulatory compliance requirements. Some of them, some of the actual compliance requirements are a little bit insane, a little bit out of date. But at the end of the day, it's still better than nothing. Am I asking for everybody to be regulated? No, I don't think that's very useful, especially in the open source hobbyist world.
Yeah.
But
especially for a small company too, right? It can be a burden on them, right? To like go to the extreme, right?
I think, Braithwaite from the criminal justice realm has a wonderful book on responsive regulation. And it's based on this concept that when you empower people and you inform them and educate them, then it becomes more of a responsibility and less of a hammer. And there's also this idea of democratic professionalism with a lowercase d, where when you empower people with information, but the right information, because like Andrew said, these regulatory standards and compliance frameworks can be arcane. And just, I've had hour-long conversations with developers who go, this is not about security. And when you explain the reality to them, you try to translate it. I mean, my favorite exercise is control mapping, where I take the arcane statement and I make it real for them. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now it's a dialogue, right? When you understand that and you empower people so that they don't feel that you're just, hit the check box. This is the rule and you must do it no matter what. When you talk to them like that, you lose that sense of process fairness or procedural justice. You don't have to give them a fair outcome, and you don't even have to have consensus. But when people feel that you've talked to them, you've engaged with them, you've explained what it means, and then you've given them the expectation clarity, then they're happier and they'll work with you, right? It's a standard kind of thing from criminal justice and other fields. I just think we need to take it and use it in information security. That approach will be more successful.
Yeah, no developer likes hearing that their code is ugly, and they also don't like hearing that, they don't like hearing you must have this particular control because someone said so. That's really you need to take them along for the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to we have a couple more questions left. So we'll throw this out to whoever wants to step up and be the first to answer this. But what if we treat secure coding practices like an additional skill that a developer can add to their resume? Would this be effective? How would we implement this, right? I know I've been in several different organizations that have you must be certified, or take this training, right, to get your certificate that you now know how to do this thing, right? But when I go to the next company, I can't bring that certificate with me, right, to say I know how to do this thing, and now I got to sit through these hours to prove it, right? So I'll throw this out to the team to.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing at OWASP is actually working on some basic training along those lines. So you can put it on your LinkedIn profile, because I mean, LinkedIn has basically replaced your resume.
Right.
And having some of my friends have Squirrel Herder as some of their skills, but if we added an official one for OWASP secure coding or whatever the case may be, that's very low cost, or if not free, I think it'd be well taken up by the communities. But yeah, we're looking for volunteers to help build that program out.
Kind of like the CSSP, right? You can look up my certification number to that I know the basics, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
The only thing I have, Andrew, the only issue I have with that is I would like to see it embedded more in educational programs by default. I mean, you know how to do JavaScript, or you know how to do this in a code, you know how to write an array. Yep. Why wouldn't you know secure coding as well? And my favorite way to sort of embed security in a product team is through security champions. I know it can be hard, but I think of it like an engagement framework, and it's a way to share the knowledge within the team. It doesn't mean that the security champion is the expert necessarily, but it means that they're a diplomat, they're a representative, a delegate who can help sort of encourage others to learn, because not everybody's going to get it at the same pace.
There's more that peer-to-peer, right? Like kids like to learn from each other than having the parent come down on them, right? They're more asked.
So I look at the security champion programs that are like BSIM and whatnot are very, very helpful. To my mind, if you had an analogy, it'd be like a general contractor knows when to get the engineer in.
Right.
The general contractor knows how to construct things that are very, very strong and teach others how to do those things. Not every apprentice or journeyman would actually be able to build a house by themselves, but a general contractor can. But there are times when it's really appropriate to go get the expertise of someone who's a specialist. So yeah, I really do believe that security champions and security satellites and things like that are a very important aspect. I wish more organizations had them.
I think it's also interesting when we talk about like adding secure practices to your resume and getting certifications, and just to reflect on the things that we were talking about previously. What about the C-suite and our leaders? we need them leaning in and engaging. I don't want to get a certification because it's a tax. I want to get it because it has perceived value, not only for me, but within my organization. And so this is another great way that leaders can lean in. And if we do have a certification program, it's not something that you just have to do. You have to sit through these hours, and when you're done, then you get your green check. We know that those are ineffective, but if there's some real meaningful value that I, as an individual contributor, get out of that, whether that's through recognition, through additional responsibilities, whatever it is, like there's a number of different ways that we can recognize that work and value it. I think that's really an important factor to consider as well.
Yeah, so one of the other things that we're working on is an academic syllabus, to Michelle's point from a little bit before. We want to have a free and open curriculum that actually deals with application security, at least for a semester. I think every software engineer and computer science student needs to do at least one semester of application security. The idea of an engineer coming out of an engineering course without any idea about environmental loads, it doesn't happen. Yet we have plenty of people coming out of computer science degrees that don't have any idea about application security.
And to that point, I think anybody who gets a cybersecurity degree should also do a semester of development.
Yeah.
I think they should know DevOps.
It goes both ways, right? So you understand the complexity of, it's not that easy to just write a secure line of code, right? There's so many variables in an environment, right? The OS, the actual hardware, right? There's so many layers that a developer has to worry about.
Yeah. The strongest pen testers are those that know how code is built, because they code.
Right.
They can create their own tools. They understand often the choices that developers have to make in a hurry, and some of the shortcuts that might be taken in particular frameworks and things like that. The strongest security professionals are coders. And I think everybody who's in our profession should actually have a development background, at least for a little while.
Yeah, agree. Nathan, anything you want to add before we move on to our last question?
+1.
Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
I think we all kind of agree in that. I have, my oldest is a software engineer, and when he was in college, I was flabbergasted at what their first coding language was. And over and over again, I would try and find the person that I could, why can't you teach them how to code when they're learning how to code, or secure code when they're coding? But all right, so let's head into our last question before we go to our Q&A space. So what's one piece of advice, and Nathan, we'll start with you since you're on the screen now. So what's one piece of advice you'd like to leave with the audience in regards to prioritizing secure by design within their organization?
Yeah, I think that first, you're not going to prioritize it overnight. This is a practice that we have to bring in, and that practice requires that we practice it. We do it day in and day out, right? This is something that you're going to iterate towards, or really just grow this practice as an individual. I think another thing, and it's weird, we've talked for 40 minutes and no one has mentioned these 2 letters, so I'm going to be the first to do it. Like, AI is now on the scene, right? So how can we leverage AI to help us with better secure by design practices? Well, the first thing you can do is, if you're working in your editor and you've got an AI chatbot right there, ask it whether or not this code is secure, and start interrogating with the AI the code that you're writing. Now, it may or may not give you the right answers. It may or may not give you good answers, but at least you're starting that conversation. And through that, maybe you can even have an easier conversation with a security professional. Look, the bot recommended this. Does this make sense? I don't understand why it would say this. Let's start from a conversation that's not just, how do I make my stuff secure, but maybe I've got concrete examples of things that I've tried that I want to more deeply understand. And so I think really embracing this idea that AI is now here. It's not going anywhere. It's probably not going to live up to all of the great hopes and dreams and promises that we all have for it either.
Get there until we start training it, right? We have to train it on the secure coding practices, right? Because we don't just dump those in there and expect it to know all the right answers.
That's exactly right. But again, it's starting those conversations, and sometimes those conversations are with other people, and sometimes they're with bots that are non-judgmental. And so that might even be an easier way for you to start having these conversations.
My only comment about AI is that it might have been trained on Stack Exchange, and a lot of the answers there are insecure. So we need to have better training models. The LLMs themselves need to be better trained.
And remember that it's going to miss, it may have some lexical awareness, but it won't have semantic awareness of the code base. So again, it's, it's sort of like this thing, right? You have this, it's a tool. I can either, like a hammer, I can hit somebody over the head with it, or I can use it to make a house, right? So these are tools. And that's, I think, I think that's what Nathan's pointing out.
Yeah, totally. And the point is, like, yes, use the AI to help you generate code, but don't stop there. Ask it additional questions and build that practice of asking and thinking about security into your interactions with the AI, with your colleagues. And Andrew, of course, you're right. Like, we have to get this information into the LLMs so that they can be smarter and have more context and better understanding of the things that are actually good practices when it comes to security.
Yeah.
All right, Michelle, what do you leave us with?
My advice, I think that's a tough one. I mean, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, I guess, because I'm going to bring up the human relationships. People want to discount those. They think they can cheat that. And you're never going to cheat that. Even with AI and everything else in the world, at some point, you're going to have to talk to each other. And I think for me, I struggled a long time to understand, well, why aren't they getting better? I don't understand. I'm still having the same conversations. Well, you're having the same conversations in the same way, and you're not listening. It's not really a conversation. It's you talking at people and not listening to them or appreciating their universe. I think that's the best thing you can do, and building that generative culture that Nathan talked about and that we talk about in the DORA research. All the academic research that I've looked at, all the change management literature, everything, it shows that if you create that collaborative environment, then you're going to facilitate change. If you command and control, it seems to work, but at the end of the day, it doesn't.
All right, there's going to be one thing that I'm going to leave with before we turn it over back to Jen for questions. Don't forget about your API security when you're doing your coding, right? That's a big, I know we haven't even talked about that today, but that's another gap that we're seeing lately, right? API security.
Yeah.
It's part of the app.
My last thought is, don't, as security people, introduce tools to developers that they can't use. There are so many tools. If you go to RSA, there are just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tools that you can buy, and most of them aren't focused on developers. They're not good value. If a tool can't be seen and used by a developer in their everyday world, and it makes useful sense to the developer, then you're wasting your money. You're much better off. There's so many tools in the market that actually work with developers. And riffing on what Michelle's been saying, work with the developers. Don't basically say the tool said this and here's a whole bunch of red. It doesn't work.
All right, so we do have one question that came in. I'll throw it out there and whoever wants to start. So this person is asking, right, where do I start? I'm a solo developer. I'm working on an application with one product owner, but about 20 application end users. But we want to start doing security. So that being said, small team, what's the best path for us, right? That I think we probably find a lot of people in that same boat.
Yeah. Yes. I'm gonna be absolutely biased
Andrew,
here.
you have the floor.
You're not biased. I agree.
Right?
We have a lot of getting started guides. The application security verification standard is a fantastic first resource. People start with the OWASP top 10, but it tells you what not to do. And the universe of what not to do is huge, whereas the things that you need to do are in the ASVS and are already written as verifications. So we have so many YouTube videos and all sorts of resources for people. Come to our Slack and ask the same question. You'll get half a dozen people willing to help straight away.
I love OWASP. I have an OWASP project. My user security stories are like a very tiny OWASP project, but I love the ASVS. I mean, I am not Andrew, I have to say, I am not a great coder. I was a system engineer and a network engineer to start. So I write a lot of for loops. That's what I learned to do. So I'm not a great coder, but OWASP helps me talk to them, and it provides a lot of great resources that I could empower development teams of, you know, small and medium companies that I've worked at. So that's where I would start too.
Yeah. Michelle, you've mentioned ASVS a couple of times. Can you explain what that is for some?
The Application Security Verification Standard, and if it's a must read, it's one of my favorites. I'm not going to say it's light reading, but it's really the definitive guide, in my opinion. I'm constantly surprised that more people don't have awareness of it. And that's why when I was a product security architect, I would base my entire practice around that. You know, if somebody asked me, what about consent patent? Go read that. Yeah. Read that.
Right. There is actually an internal Google project that's modifying the ASVS for its own internal use. That's actually really good industry adoption. It'll actually be part of the mobile, you know, the Shield program, the one that actually provides a little bit of information to the user. It's essentially a cut down version of the ASVS for that program.
And I would also encourage you, if, you know, small team, small individual, like, you know, getting started, look for your local ISSA, ISACA, those types of, or OWASP, right? Look for like meetups that get together that talk about this stuff, because everyone likes to share, right? We all like to collaborate, and it, you know, just like, you know, the panelists have talked about today, like reach out to your peers in your industry. They're always willing to share, right? There's lots of information out there.
Yeah, we have 273 chapters around the world. There's going to be one close to you.
Yeah, for sure.
And frankly, showing up today and asking that question, you have taken a step, and that is a step in the right direction. So you're on the path already. Just keep the faith and keep that journey going.
Yeah, and it's a marathon, right? So, you know, just small bites at a time, right? Just find one thing, like what's the biggest, you know, what's the most common ticket or thing that you're dealing with, right? How can you, you know, bite off one of those little vulnerabilities at a time, right? One small piece. All right. Jen, it doesn't look like we have any more questions in the queue. Anything?
I just want to point out that next month is Cybersecurity Month, and we're going to be doing a series of blog posts to help support that initiative. And so this is a really good thing from the NCA, and definitely keep an eye out for the NCA's website for activities and things.
Yeah, and of course we should mention the NCA, right? And that's one of the things that I think the team has done a really good job for the multiple conferences that the NCA has hosted, convened. We've brought in, it's more than just user awareness, it's also this application security element to these. So, you know, look for the next time that's happening, right? Because we do have that stuff on the agenda, so that, you know, we know sometimes the awareness team covers both aspects. They don't have the dedicated person that can just do AppSec, where they kind of have to do that. And so we've incorporated that into our awareness conferences to be able to provide some of those insights as well. All right, so it looks like we're done with questions here. So I just want to take a moment and thank Nathan, Andrew, and Michelle. Thanks for being with us today on this panel. Great conversation and lots of things to take back. Now I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the recording. I didn't have a pen with me to write down all those books and references and studies that you were referencing, because there's knowledge is power, right? I'm always looking for the latest research on how can I help, you know, human behavior, any types of those things, right? So again, thank you for being here, and thanks for everyone for joining us today.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for having me. And feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter if anybody wants more information about what I talked about. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.